My name is Clara Bennett, 26 years old, born and raised in the heart of Kansas. Last month, my father sold my dream for $42,000 and a used Ford truck. You might think I'm exaggerating. I wish I were. The call came just after dawn. The prairie sky outside my apartment in Denver was painted in soft pink and gold, the kind of morning that usually makes you feel like anything's possible. I was sipping stale coffee, reviewing final blueprints for a sustainable housing project I'd spent 3 years designing, my first big break as an architect, when my father's name lit up my phone. "Morning, Daddy," I said, smiling automatically. His voice was calm, almost cheerful. "Morning, Pumpkin. Just wanted to let you know the farm's taken care of. We signed the papers last night." I froze. "What papers?" "The sale, honey. Richardson's boy offered a fair deal. We close next week." The mug slipped from my hand and shattered on the counter. He was talking about Bennett Acres, our family's 120-year-old wheat farm, the land that had been in our family since before Kansas had paved roads. The same land I'd spent my childhood running through, sketching barns, dreaming of restoring into sustainable housing for local families. He continued, as if he were reading a grocery list. "Figured you'd be busy with that fancy Denver job. Your brother's gonna take the truck, help me haul the rest." I swallowed hard. "You sold it without telling me? You're the one who left, Clara. Can't take care of what you abandoned." That single word, abandoned, sliced through me sharper than glass. If you're watching this right now, I want you to tell me in the comments, have you ever been punished just for dreaming bigger than your zip code? Because that's exactly what happened to me. I grew up in a town with 1 grocery store, 2 churches, and a high school football team. People cared about more than graduation rates. My mother passed away when I was 10. Lightning struck our old barn during a summer storm, and she never made it out in time. From that day on, it was just me, my father, and my older brother, Evan, who was always the golden boy. Varsity quarterback, easy charm, everyone's favorite. I was the quiet one. The planner, the good student, the girl who spent weekends drawing blueprints instead of going to bonfires. My teachers said I'd go far. My father said I'd forget where I came from. When my high school art project won first place at the county fair, a model of a self-sustaining farmhouse powered entirely by solar panels, the local newspaper ran a story. I still remember the headline, "Small Town Girl, Big City Dreams." Dad refused to read it. "You can't eat sunlight, Clara," he said. "Dreams don't pay bills." The truth was, my father loved control the way farmers love rain, fiercely, desperately, and without apology. When my scholarship to the University of Colorado arrived, he didn't even come to see me off. He just said, "Don't call unless it's serious." And so I didn't. I worked through college, graduated top of my class, and got hired by an architecture firm specializing in sustainable design. I sent postcards home. I called on holidays. Silence, mostly. My brother married, stayed in town, and inherited Dad's approval like an old jacket passed down through generations. So when my phone rang that morning, when he told me he'd sold our family land to a developer planning to build luxury condos, it felt like losing my mother all over again. Only this time, the fire wasn't lightning. It was betrayal. That night, I drove back to Kansas under a stormy sky that looked almost biblical. I didn't tell my father I was coming. When I pulled up, the porch light was still on, but the windows were dark. The sold sign stood crooked in the front yard, stuck between patches of dead grass. I stood there in the drizzle, staring at it, until I noticed a figure behind the window curtain. My father, watching, motionless. Our eyes met for the first time in 3 years. And that was the moment I made a decision that would change both our lives. If he could sell my dream, then I would build one he could never take away. A dream big enough to shake the very ground he thought I'd forgotten. What happened next would take me from that rain-soaked Kansas night to a courtroom in Chicago, to national headlines, and to a moment that made my father drop his coffee cup in disbelief. But first, let me tell you how a small-town farm girl turned her heartbreak into a blueprint that would rebuild more than just homes. It would rebuild her family's name. The next morning, Kansas wore a sky the color of pewter, the kind of sky that warned you something was coming, maybe rain, maybe reckoning. I stood at the edge of Bennett Acres, mud soaking into my boots, the sold sign tilted in the yard like a crooked tombstone. The house was smaller than I remembered, sagging under years of storms and silence. Then the screen door creaked open. My father stepped out, mug of black coffee in hand, his face weathered like the land itself. He looked at me the way he might look at a stranger trespassing. "Morning," he said, voice steady as ever. "You sold the farm," I said, without telling me. He leaned on the doorframe, eyes sharp under his ball cap. "Wasn't much to tell. It's done." "Done?" I repeated. "That land's been in our family for 4 generations. You said you'd never sell it." He shrugged. "Times change. Taxes don't. Evan's got a family to feed. We needed cash flow. You're off designing your little houses in the city. Figured you wouldn't care." "I care because you sold everything Mom worked for," I shot back. "The garden she planted, the barn we rebuilt after the storm, all of it." He took another sip, gaze drifting past me to the fields beyond. "You left, Clara. Don't act surprised if the world kept spinning without you." That was it, the final twist of the knife. For years, I'd blamed myself for leaving home, thinking maybe I was selfish for wanting more. But standing there, staring at the man who'd traded a legacy for convenience, something inside me finally snapped into focus. "I'm going to buy it back," I said. He blinked, then laughed, a deep guttural laugh that cut through the cold morning air. "Buy it back? With what, those sketches of yours? Sweetheart, you're still living off dreams." I met his eyes. Then it's time they paid off. And I turned and walked away, not because I wasn't angry, but because I finally understood that anger wasn't the enemy. Smallness was. Back in Denver, the city pulsed around me like an electrical current. I spent my days designing homes for people I'd never meet, and my nights sketching blueprints for something bigger. That's when I pulled out an old notebook, the one my mother had given me the year she died. Inside were pages of her neat handwriting, gardening notes, quotes from scripture, little doodles of flowers. But on the back page, in faded pencil, she'd written 6 words that changed everything. "You can rebuild what they destroy." That night, I drafted my first design for what would become Haven Roots, a home that could expand and adapt like a living thing, eco-friendly, affordable, and strong enough to withstand the kind of storms that had taken her from me. I worked for weeks in silence, ate noodles from cups, slept under my drafting table. Every sound of the city outside, sirens, car horns, the clack of passing trains, felt like a heartbeat pushing me forward. When I finally showed the design to my firm, they smiled the way polite people smile before crushing your dreams. "Lovely concept, Clara," one executive said, "but rural sustainability isn't exactly marketable. You're solving a problem that doesn't pay." The laughter in the room was quiet, but it echoed like thunder. So that night, I cleared out my desk, packed my things into a cardboard box, and left the building without looking back. For months, I survived on fumes and conviction. I sold my furniture, lived on instant oatmeal, and borrowed my friend's old laptop when mine died. But word of Haven Roots started spreading online. I posted photos of my prototype built from recycled wood, standing proud in the middle of a dry field. I wrote from my heart, what if the American dream wasn't about leaving home, but rebuilding it? The post exploded overnight. Thousands of shares. Hundreds of emails from veterans, single moms, and farmers who'd lost everything to fires, floods, or corporate takeovers. Still, attention didn't pay bills. When the first investor meeting came, I wore a thrift store blazer and hope-like armor. The man across the table listened with his jaw resting on his hand. When I finished, he said, "Nice story, but it's not scalable. Nobody invests in nostalgia." I walked out smiling. Not because it didn't hurt, but because now I knew exactly what I was fighting. Then came the email. Subject line, Federal Rural Housing Pilot, Immediate Inquiry. It was from Dr. Miriam Sloan, a housing advisor in Washington. She'd seen my designs online. "I grew up on a corn farm in Iowa," she wrote. I know what it's like to lose everything and still have to smile. Let's talk." We spoke the next morning. She offered Haven Roots a chance to join a pilot program for sustainable housing in disaster-affected communities. My first build site? Western Kansas, the same soil my father said I'd never stand on again. When I returned, the place was almost unrecognizable. The old Bennett land was now fenced off, the start of a luxury condo development no local family could afford. It stung, but I drove past it and headed for Dover Creek, a struggling farming town hit hard by tornadoes the year before. We built the first Haven Roots home on the edge of town, a simple structure, part metal, part reclaimed wood, solar panels gleaming under the sun. It wasn't just a building, it was a statement, proof that ordinary people deserved extraordinary care. The local newspaper ran a story. "Kansas woman builds hope from the ground up." And for the first time in years, my father called. "Saw your picture in the paper," he said quietly. "Looks like you're doing all right." "More than all right," I replied. "You should come see it." He hesitated, then muttered, "Maybe," but he didn't. Months passed. We built 5 more homes, then 10. The community rallied around us. Volunteers, carpenters, local teachers bringing their students to help paint walls. I started getting calls from towns in Oklahoma, Nebraska, and Colorado. And then CNN picked up the story. That was when everything changed. Suddenly, reporters wanted interviews, investors wanted meetings, government officials wanted to partner. Haven Roots was no longer a wild idea, it was a movement. But not everyone was cheering. The developer who had bought our family farm, Richardson & Co., wasn't thrilled to see my name on national TV, especially since my model homes were outperforming his luxury builds. Within weeks, I started getting anonymous calls, zoning complaints, and even a cease and desist letter accusing me of intellectual property violation. It was intimidation, pure and simple. I was furious, but also terrified. The man behind Richardson & Co. was none other than Daniel Richardson, the same man who had convinced my father to sell the farm. So I did something the old Clara never would have done. I fought back. With Dr. Sloan's help, I took them to court, proving that their company had violated environmental codes and built on unstable soil, the same land I had once analyzed in high school. 3 weeks later, the court ruled in my favor. Richardson's development was halted, pending full investigation. When the news broke, my father called again, his voice shaky this time. "You took on Richardson and won. Clara, He stopped. "Your mom would have been proud." That night, for the first time in years, I didn't dream of the farm burning. I dreamed of rebuilding. By late 2024, Haven Roots had become one of the fastest-growing sustainable housing startups in America. We'd partnered with Habitat for Humanity, won federal grants, and were invited to speak at the White House's Innovation in Rural Development Summit. But when the lights hit that stage and the applause roared, my thoughts weren't on the cameras or the accolades. They were on Kansas. The open fields, the smell of rain, the sound of my father's distant laughter. I realized that every blueprint I had drawn, every nail I had hammered, had been one long love letter to the home I refused to give up on. That was the day I stopped calling Haven Roots a business. It was a promise. If you're still watching this, remember this. When people tell you, "You left, you don't belong anymore," what they really mean is, you've grown beyond what I can understand. But growth isn't betrayal, it's survival. And sometimes you have to leave home to learn how to rebuild it. Because the real blueprint isn't made of wood or steel, it's made of belief. And belief, unlike land, can never be sold. The morning after the CNN interview aired, I woke up to 63 new emails and 12 missed calls. At first, I thought it was congratulations. Then I read the subject lines. "Urgent Haven Roots under investigation for misuse of federal funds." Breaking. Whistleblower claims Bennett falsified grant documents. Clara Bennett. Visionary or fraud? My hands trembled as I scrolled. The articles all repeated the same lie. that I had manipulated data in our FEMA partnership reports, exaggerated the number of homes completed, and pocketed federal money through shell nonprofits. None of it was true. But truth rarely matters first. By noon, every major outlet had picked up the story. Investors froze funding. The pilot towns hit pause. My phone rang nonstop, most calls from people who once called me genius and now wanted clarification. Dr. Sloan called last. Her voice, steady but strained, broke through the static. "They're coming hard, Clara. Richardson's lobbying group is behind it. They've planted a fake whistleblower. We'll fight this, but you need to stay calm." Calm? My reputation was on fire, and the same headlines that had lifted me into sunlight were now burning my name in public. That week became a blur of chaos. Legal meetings, emergency press releases, and sleepless nights. Volunteers pulled away, afraid of being tied to a scandal. Our website crashed under the weight of angry comments. And then came the worst blow. An email from the Department of Housing. Federal funds suspended pending investigation. Our accounts froze overnight. Paychecks bounced. My small team, Zoe, Amir, and 3 new hires, gathered in the Denver office, faces pale with exhaustion. "We can't pay rent next month," Amir said quietly. Zoe, usually unflappable, rubbed her temples. "They're killing us through headlines, not courts." I nodded, throat tight. "We'll find a way." But even as I said it, I wasn't sure how. That night, I sat alone in the office, surrounded by unfinished models and silence. Outside, snow fell, coating the windows in white. It reminded me of Kansas winters, cold, unforgiving, but honest. You knew where you stood in a Kansas storm. Here, I wasn't sure of anything. At 2 a.m., my father called, the last person I expected. "You holding up?" he asked, voice gruff. I almost laughed. "Barely. People in town are talking. I told them it's all lies. You didn't cheat anyone." His faith startled me more than the accusations. "Thanks, Dad," I whispered. He cleared his throat. "Richardson's been sniffing around here again. He's funding some county project, buying influence. Don't let him scare you, Clara. You got more grit than he ever will." For the first time in my life, my father wasn't my critic. He was my ally. And somehow that gave me enough strength to face the next day. Dr. Sloan and I assembled a crisis team. We gathered every document, every receipt, every line of code and project report. For 3 weeks, we lived in conference rooms, building a paper fortress against lies. In that chaos, something unexpected happened. Communities started defending us. Residents of Dover Creek uploaded videos showing their Haven Roots homes, proudly walking reporters through solar systems and water filtering units. Teachers wrote op-eds about students who'd helped build them. A veteran named Harold went viral on TikTok saying, "That woman didn't steal money, she gave us back our dignity." The tide started to turn, but Richardson and Coers wasn't done. They released drone footage claiming our homes were unsafe and unfit for occupancy. One image showed a roof panel slightly bent after a tornado, cropped to look like a collapse. By then, my anger had evolved into precision. I scheduled a press conference. It wasn't flashy. A rented hall, a single podium, rows of folding chairs. I wore jeans and a navy blazer still stained with dust from construction. When the cameras clicked, I took a deep breath. For the past month, misinformation has spread faster than any storm I've ever built against. So let's talk facts, not headlines, not politics, facts. I showed documentation of every dollar spent, photos of every home. Then I played side-by-side footage, our real roofs standing firm through 80 muff winds, and Richardson's luxury builds already cracking under the same pressure. If caring about forgotten towns makes me naive, then call me naive. But I will not apologize for believing that every American deserves a home strong enough to stand through the storm, literal or political. The room fell silent. Then applause broke out. Hesitant at first, then roaring. The next day, headlines shifted. Bennett fights back. Small-town architect exposes developer corruption. And the dominoes began to fall. 2 weeks later, federal investigators confirmed what we'd suspected. Richardson and Coors had falsified their safety reports, bribed local officials, and leaked forged documents to smear Haven Roots. Arrests followed, lawsuits too. The suspension on our funding was lifted. Overnight, we went from scandal to symbol. Reporters now called me the woman who wouldn't break. I didn't feel unbreakable. I felt tempered, like metal shaped in fire. But not everyone celebrated. Evan, my brother, texted me for the first time in years. "Proud of you. Dad's talking about you nonstop. He even turned down Richardson's offer to buy the rest of the property. Says it's time we build something ourselves." It hit me harder than any award. The following spring, Haven Roots was invited to Washington for the National Housing Innovation Summit, the biggest stage in our field. I almost declined. Public spotlight had become a wound I wasn't ready to reopen. But Dr. Sloan insisted. "This isn't about fame, Clara. It's about proof that good work survives lies." So I went. The Capitol looked unreal under the morning light, marble shining, flags snapping in the wind. Inside, the air buzzed with cameras, suits, and chatter. Our panel was scheduled last, Building the Future of the American Heartland. Backstage, my palms were slick with sweat. I hadn't told anyone, but my father was somewhere in the crowd. Evan, too. They'd driven 12 hours from Kansas in his old truck. When they called my name, the applause startled me. Not polite, genuine. I stepped onto the stage, adjusted the mic, and took a long look at the sea of faces. I'm Clara Bennett. I design houses. But what I really build is something quieter. The belief that where you come from shouldn't decide how safe you are. I told them about Dover Creek, about the volunteers, about the night I almost quit, about my father, who taught me stubbornness was a curse until it became my greatest weapon. Then I said the line that came straight from my mother's old notebook. You can rebuild what they destroy. Not just buildings, but belief. The hall rose to its feet. Cameras flashed. My father wiped his eyes, unashamed. Afterward, he found me backstage. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then he reached into his jacket and pulled out something small, a folded piece of paper, edges yellowed. It was Mom's handwriting. Dreams don't die, Clara. They wait for courage. I pressed it to my chest. Where did you find this? In her Bible, he said. I think she meant for you to have it. We stood there. Two stubborn souls finally speaking the same language, silence and pride. Over the next year, Haven Roots became a national model. We expanded to 21 states, building 8,000 homes. We launched training programs for veterans, single parents, and Native communities. We even started a branch for disaster relief housing in California and Florida. People called it a miracle. But to me, it was math. Heartbreak plus purpose equals change. The money, the awards, none of it mattered as much as one small moment. The day my father showed up unannounced at a build site in Oklahoma, tool belt around his waist. Figured I'd lend a hand, he said. He stayed 3 days, built 2 frames, made friends with everyone. When he left, the crew signed his hat with black marker, honorary founder. In 2025, we broke ground on our biggest project yet, a partnership with the Federal Green Housing Act to rebuild 10,000 sustainable homes across rural America. The first one stood on land that used to be Bennett Acres. It had taken nearly 4 years, but the developer's project had been dismantled after the lawsuit. The county offered me the chance to buy back a portion of the land at a fair price. I didn't hesitate. When I told my father, he didn't say anything. He just showed up with his old truck full of tools. We spent a week working side by side, rebuilding fences, setting foundations. The same soil that had once divided us now lay beneath our boots, solid and forgiving. On the final evening, as the sun set across the prairie, we planted a small oak sapling in front of the new Haven Roots model home. Think it'll grow? He asked. I smiled. It already has. That night, I couldn't sleep. I walked out to the porch, the air warm with summer and cicadas. The stars looked endless, like they had when I was a kid lying on the barn roof. Dad joined me, hands in his pockets. You know, he said softly, I used to think success was money, land, keeping control, watching you. I see it's something else. What is it then? He looked at the horizon. Leaving something standing after you're gone. That's what your mom wanted. Guess she picked the right one to finish the job. For the first time, I laughed freely with him. No bitterness. Just the quiet understanding that forgiveness is another kind of foundation. Invisible, but load-bearing. By the end of 2025, Haven Roots had grown beyond me. Dr. Sloan became our board chair. Zoe and Amir led regional teams. Evan handled community partnerships back home. I finally took a breath. And for the first time since I was that little girl sketching barns in Kansas, I felt at peace. Not because everything was perfect, but because I finally understood the lesson I'd been chasing all my life. You don't need to win the world to heal it. You just have to rebuild the part that broke you. So if you're watching this now, whether you're 20 or 60, whether you're in a small town, a big city, or somewhere in between, I want you to remember something. The world will try to sell your dreams. People will doubt you, dismiss you, call you naive. They'll tell you to take the safe road, the predictable bus route. Take it if you must, but never forget to build your own way back. Because someday, the same people who said you were foolish will stand in the crowd clapping and realize you didn't just prove them wrong, you showed them what was possible. That's what my story became. A blueprint, not just for homes, but for hope. And when I see the sun rise over the Kansas plains now, light spilling across new roofs that bear the name Haven Roots, I think of my mother's words again, you can rebuild what they destroy. She was right. We did. And if you're still here, listening, maybe now it's your turn. By December 2025, the world had changed around me. Or maybe I had finally changed enough to see it differently. Snow fell lightly outside my Manhattan office window, soft as memory. Inside, the hum of voices and laughter filled the air as our team wrapped up the last meeting of the year. The big screen behind us displayed the milestone we'd once only dreamed of. 10,000 homes built, 42 states, 0 foreclosures. It didn't feel real. I remembered when Haven Roots was nothing but scribbles in a spiral notebook and a stubborn girl's defiance. Now it had become a movement, living proof that the American dream could evolve without losing its soul. Our conference table was covered in paper cups, blueprints, and gingerbread cookies shaped like houses. Amir was arguing with Zoe over who made the better hot cocoa. Sloan stood by the window, gazing at the snow with that thoughtful look she always had when she was about to say something important. "Clara," she said softly, "have you seen the letter?" I frowned. "What letter?" She handed me a white envelope stamped with a gold seal, the official crest of the United States government. My heart skipped. I tore it open. Inside was a simple invitation printed on heavy cardstock. The White House invites Ms. Clara Bennett to attend the National Medal of Innovation ceremony, honoring her contributions to sustainable housing and community development. For a moment, I couldn't move. The room blurred. Zoe gasped. Amir whooped. Dr. Sloan smiled with quiet pride. But all I could think of was that first night in Denver. Me alone in a room full of rejection letters, telling myself that failure wasn't fatal. And now, this, the Medal of Innovation, the same award once given to people whose names I'd studied in textbooks, people like Elon Musk, Mae Jemison, and Norman Foster. I sat down, dizzy with disbelief. "Looks like you're going to Washington again," Dr. Sloan said. "Looks like it," I murmured. 3 weeks later, I stepped off the plane at Reagan National Airport, the cold D.C. air biting through my coat. The city shimmered with Christmas lights, monuments glowing like watchful ghosts of history. The ceremony was scheduled for December 18th, the final Friday before Christmas. The morning of, I woke up before dawn in my hotel room, nerves fluttering like wings in my chest. I ironed my navy suit twice, polished my mother's old silver bracelet, and slipped her note into my pocket, the one my father had given me backstage at the housing summit. "Dreams don't die. They wait for courage. At 10 a.m., a black car arrived to take me to the White House. As it pulled through the gates, I looked out the window and saw a small group of protesters holding handmade signs that read, "Housing is a human right." Haven Roots, Hope. I smiled. They weren't protesting me. They were carrying the mission forward. Inside, the East Room was a sea of polished wood and chandeliers. Reporters lined the back wall, rows of chairs filled with scientists, inventors, and engineers, all murmuring in hushed excitement. When my name was called, I walked toward the stage under blinding lights. The president, a tall woman with kind eyes and the firm handshake of a leader who'd seen her own share of storms, smiled at me. "Miss Bennett," she said, "your work reminds us that progress isn't measured only in numbers, but in the lives it touches. America needs builders of both homes and hope." She placed the medal around my neck. The applause rose like a wave. In that moment, time slowed. The sound faded, the lights dimmed, and I could almost hear my mother's voice whispering through the static of memory. "You can rebuild what they destroy." That evening, I took a walk through the National Mall. Snow had started falling again, blanketing the monuments in silence. The Lincoln Memorial loomed ahead, solemn and familiar. I stood at the base of the steps, looking out over the reflecting pool. The surface mirrored the city lights, fractured and beautiful. Behind me, a familiar voice said, "Thought I'd find you here." I turned. My father stood there, coat dusted with snow, his Kansas flannel peeking from under a borrowed blazer. He looked slightly out of place among the tourists, and yet perfectly right where he was. "You came," I said, smiling. He shrugged. "Couldn't miss watching my daughter make the president cry." I laughed, wiping away a tear. "That's an exaggeration." "Maybe," he said, "but you did good, kid. Real good." We walked in silence for a while, footsteps crunching in snow. Finally, he stopped and said, "You know, when I sold the farm, I thought I was saving our family. Turns out you were the one who actually did." I looked up at him. The man who'd once taught me that control was survival, and realized he'd learned something too. "You taught me grit," I said, "even when it hurt." He nodded. "Guess we both built something from the wreckage." We stood together as the wind swept across the mall, carrying the faint hum of distant carolers singing Silent Night. It was one of those rare moments in life when past and present shake hands. A few days later, I was back in Kansas. The holidays had always been quiet since Mom passed, but this year felt different. The town had changed. Dover Creek was thriving, with new homes, a library, and a solar plant run by local workers, all part of Haven Roots' newest community initiative. That Christmas Eve, we hosted an open dinner at the town hall. Long tables lined the room, filled with potluck dishes, mashed potatoes, casseroles, pecan pies, and laughter. Families from every background, farmers, teachers, veterans, sat together like old friends. A little girl with freckles ran up to me holding a crayon drawing. It showed a house under a bright yellow sun. "Miss Clara," she said, "this is my home. I drew it because I love it." Her mother smiled shyly behind her. "We moved into a Haven Roots house last spring. I just wanted to say thank you." I knelt down, taking the drawing. "You built it too," I said. "Every person who believes in something better helps raise the walls." The girl grinned. "I want to build houses like you when I grow up." I touched her shoulder. "You will, and you'll build them even better." After dinner, my father and I drove out to the edge of town, to the place where Bennett Acres had once been. The new Haven Roots community stood there now, quiet and glowing under the moonlight. Rows of small, solar-paneled homes stretched across the land, their windows warm with light. At the center stood the oak sapling we'd planted months ago. It had grown taller than I expected, branches spread wide like arms. Dad placed his hand on the trunk. "Looks strong," he said. "It is," I whispered. "It's rooted deep." He turned to me, eyes glinting. "Your mom would have loved this. She always said trees and people grow the same way, slow, stubborn, and toward the light. We stood there for a long time, listening to the wind rustle through the branches. Then I pulled a small wooden plaque from my coat pocket. On it, I'd engraved 6 simple words: "You can rebuild what they destroy." I knelt and pressed it into the earth at the tree's base. Dad helped steady it. When we stepped back, the moonlight caught the letters, making them gleam faintly. "Now it's permanent," he said. "No," I corrected gently. "Now it's alive." In the months that followed, life settled into a rhythm. Not glamorous, not easy, but steady. Haven Roots became more than a company. It became a teaching platform. We trained women in construction trades, funded scholarships for rural students, and donated emergency housing kits to wildfire zones in California and hurricane victims in Louisiana. People started calling us the new heart of America. But to me, we were just continuing what every small-town dreamer has done for generations, taking what's broken and making it whole again. I still visited that oak tree whenever I was home. Sometimes kids would gather there after school, laughing, climbing its low branches, eating ice pops. The plaque remained untouched, weathered, but legible. Each time I saw it, I was reminded of how far we'd come, from anger to forgiveness, from loss to legacy. One night, I got a message from Evan. "You should see this." He sent a link to a local news story. The town had voted to rename the area around the oak tree as Bennett Grove, officially designating it a protected landmark. The article ended with a quote from a Dover Creek resident. "Bennett Grove isn't just a place. It's a reminder that when one person refuses to give up, a whole town learns how to begin again." I read that line 3 times before tears blurred the words. Because that, more than medals or fame, was the real award. Now, when people ask me what success feels like, I tell them this. It feels like the sound of hammers on a quiet morning. It feels like laughter echoing through new hallways. It feels like forgiveness between 2 stubborn hearts under a Kansas sky. Success isn't applause, it's peace. And peace, I've learned, is something you build one plank, one choice, one act of courage at a time. If you've been following this story, maybe you've seen yourself somewhere in it. The kid who was overlooked, the dreamer who was dismissed, the adult still trying to heal from someone else's doubt. So let me leave you with this. Your worth isn't measured by who claps for you. It's measured by what you build when no one's watching. Start with one step. One idea, one act of faith. Because sometimes the smallest foundations carry the greatest houses. And one day, when you stand in the light of something you built with your own hands, you'll realize the truth that took me years to learn. You were never asking for too much. You were just asking the wrong people. When I drive home now, I always slow down as I pass the sign at the edge of Dover Creek. It reads, "Welcome to Haven Roots, population, growing." And every time, I smile. Because it's not just a town anymore. It's proof. Proof that even after everything falls apart, family, faith, plans, you can still rebuild. And when you do, you might just discover that what you built was never just a house. It was a home for hope.